إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله خير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We give praise and thanks to Almighty Allah. We ask Him to shower His blessings upon the noblest of mankind, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, members of his household, his companions, all those who have stood, are standing, and will come to stand on this path of Sirat al-Mustaqim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we have not ceased to be going through the book on Zakat by the great Sheikh Sa'id ibn Ali ibn Wahf ibn Muhammad Al-Qahtaani. He passed away in the year 1440, 12th of Muharram, Tuesday, which coincided with the 1st of October 2018. May Allah forgive him the sins and grant him paradise and reward him for what he has put forth in this deen. Alhamdulillah. Last week we took a couple of issues, and the last of them that we took was on the تضم ثمرة العام الواحد لبعضها في تكميل النصاب, that we add up the thamarat, the proceeds of 1 year, the harvests of 1 year, to themselves. That is, if, for instance, one has a crop that one grows, and one grows it, and in 5 months it yields, in 5 lunar months it produces its harvest, then perhaps one rests the farm for 1 month, clears it and prepares it for another season, and you plant, and after another 5 months another harvest is due. So this is all happening. These 2 harvests are happening in 1 single year. So the Sheikh rahimahullah said that what we are to do is to join these 2 harvests together to make the nisab. One will not say that if the first harvest was below 5 awsaq, which is the nisab for farm produce, that it is not up to the nisab, therefore I'm not paying zakah. Yes, at that point in time, in the first harvest, there's no zakah. However, when the second harvest comes, and if you add what you harvested, the quantity, you're not required to keep it up until the second harvest, but you will know at the first harvest what the quantity was. So if, for instance, it was 3 awsaq, and in the second harvest you had 3 awsaq also, which is 6 awsaq, and the zakah, the nisab for zakah, is 5 awsaq. So you have exceeded the nisab. Zakah is due once you have 5 awsaq and above. Now you have 6 awsaq. So it is like one has 2 farms at different locations. That is the same way it is. That you have 2 farms at different locations. One farm produces 3 awsaq, the other produces 3 awsaq. This is 6 awsaq. You won't say, oh, the proceeds from this farm or the harvest from this farm is 3 awsaq, so there's no zakah on it. The proceed for the harvest on the second farm is also 3 awsaq, which is below 5 awsaq, so there's no zakah on it. No, you will join both the harvest of both farms together to meet the nisab. So the very same thing here, if it is within one hawl, and Allahu A'lam. So that is where we stopped last week. Inshallah, we'll proceed from there this week. Sheikh Rahimahullah, Sheikh Sa'id ibn Ali ibn Wahf Al-Qahtaani Rahimahullah, he says, Al-Rabi', the fourth. Okay, there's a question. Please go ahead, Man Mujib.
Jazakallah khair. Doctor, please, I want to just double check something in case I missed it up. For the likes of dates, raisins, and wheat, or items that can be storable, that food farm harvest that is storable, that put them under the things that we can take, you can count and all that. The storability, I want to be sure that it's relevant for their, should I say, their usage. Like, it's the storability here, does it also pertain to waiting for one whole year, or I think not. I don't remember if this was
storability in terms of the question isn't clear.
Okay.
Are you saying that must it be storable for at least a year before we can regard it as storable? Is that the question?
Yes, that's the question, which I think is incorrect.
Barakallahu fiqh, barakallahu fiqh. Now, one of the topics that we took last week, the Sheikh Rahimahullah explained to us, is that for something to be regarded as wealth, it should be something that can be stored for a long period. Long enough, I added last week, that perhaps it can also be inherited. This is wealth. So this is one of the arguments of the scholars who say that vegetables and things like these cannot be considered as wealth. So it must be something that can be stored for a long time. 1 year, beyond 1 year. I don't know that I don't know if the scholars put a minimum, to it. But adatan, in the custom of the people, what the people regard as a long period of time, then this wealth, should be able to pass through that, should be able to live through that. It may not be all of it that will survive that period of time. Like, for instance, animals are, non-working, free-range animals, bahimatul an'am, of the camel category, of the cow family, of the sheep family. These are wealth. They live, for a couple of years ordinarily, but it doesn't mean that each one of them will live for even up to a year. Some might die in utero, some might die immediately after birth, some might die before a year or something like that. But generally, they live, the full life or the average life that animals in that category would live. So the same thing applies to the crops. So if you look at a crop and you see that the lifespan or the storage shelf life of this is long, then it will, constitute, what we're talking about. It will constitute wealth. It will constitute wealth. And barakallahu fiqh, it brings to mind a question that was asked, last week, about why don't we just equate what we are to pay zakah on with what we are to pay zakat al-fitr on, to equate what we are to pay zakat on wealth on with what we are to pay zakat al-fitr on. There's a hadith that makes that, yes, but before we explained last week that yes, this is the end result of the position of some of the scholars, like Imam Abu Hanifa, for instance, and one of the positions of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. However, what we said, there are weaknesses in this position. And one of the weaknesses is that the Prophet ﷺ did not collect zakah on all food items. He collected on some and he didn't collect on some. And the ones that he collected on were the wheat, barley, and dates and raisins. That is one weakness to that point. Another weakness to it is that there's a hadith on the about zakat al-fitr, what should be collected in it. It says that zakat al-fitr used to be collected during the time of the Prophet ﷺ on qut, on the staple foods of the people. And the staple foods were listed. And out of those staple foods that were listed was, cheese, al-aqid. Definitely we did not grow cheese on the farm. But it was collected as zakat al-fitr because this is what the people, would consume. So zakat al-fitr, the basis of it, according to that hadith, is that it is the staple food of the people. Things that you grow and things that you do not grow on the farm are included once it is the staple food of the people. Such that the scholars say that if you are in the North Pole, for instance, and what they eat is meat, then you give zakat al-fitr in meat to them because that is their staple food. This does not apply in the case of zakat of mal, in zuru', farm produce, because there's ijma' of the scholars on these four items: wheat, barley, raisins, and tamar, dates. These four, there is ijma' of the scholars on them. Anything beyond them is where there's ikhtilafat. And those who extend it beyond these four, we've stated the weaknesses in their positions. The strongest, or one of them rather, is that the Prophet ﷺ did not collect on these things that have been added to the original four that we mentioned. And the hadith that we just talked about shows that there's a difference between what is collected for zakat al-fitr and zakat al-mal. Barakallahu fikum. Now, Rabi'an, the Sheikh rahimahullah said, tajibu az-zakah fi hubub wa-thimar. It says zakah is compulsory on al-hubub, seed-like products like your wheat, your barley, wa-thimar, and fruit-like farm produce like your grapes. When grapes are dry, that's when they become referred to as raisins, and dates. So dates and raisins. Now, Allahu A'lam, when one reads through what is under this heading, it appears that what the Sheikh rahimahullah wanted to write as the heading was that mata, when tajibu zakah, does zakah become compulsory fi al-hubub wa thimar. So mata can be added over here. Mata tajibu az-zakah fi al-hubub wa al-thimar. When does zakah become compulsory on seed-like farm produce and fruit-like farm produce? إذا اشتد الحب فصار قويا. As for seed-like farm produce, and the two that there's ijma' on wheat and barley, إذا اشتدت الحبوب, if these seed-like products become strong, if you monitor the development of seed-like farm produce, you see that when they have not yet reached their point of being harvested, when they're still very young, you see that they are weak in structure. So he said, when zakah becomes compulsory, is when this seed-like farm produce becomes qawiyya and becomes strong. La yandaghid idha dughid. It does not fracture, or it does not fracture when you press on it. It does not fracture when you press on it. So you know that at this point, it has become mature, and it is. This is one of the things that you look out for when you're. It's not the only thing, but one of the things that you look out for when you want to know whether something is ripe for harvesting or not. Wajabat az-zakah. Then at this point, zakah becomes compulsory. In short, whatever quality that a seed-like or fruit-like farm produce has, that those in that field, when they see these qualities, they know that it has become ripe or ready for harvest. Once those characteristics are there, and they differ from crop to crop, but once those characteristics are there, then one will say that the zakah has become due on that crop. Remember, Allah says, وَآتُ حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, and pay the rights. And there are two rights, as we talked about, zakah being one of them, the other being given in a certain type of charity that is compulsory, that is not zakah. So when do you do this? Yaum hasadi, on the day that it is harvested. On the day that it is harvested. So on this day, that that is the ayah of the Quran with respect to when you pay zakah. This ayah of the Quran brings a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. The majority of the scholars say that Yaum hasadi is the time when it is due for harvesting. The day of harvesting is the time when it is due for harvesting. When you look at the crop, the characteristics that will make it harvestable are all there. That is the first day when it can be harvested. So that is Yaum hasadi, Yaum hasadi, or Yaum hasadi. Some of the scholars said no. As long as you have not yet, it is the practical harvest that they're talking about. So even yes, if all the characteristics to judge that something is ready for harvest is there, meaning that should be the first day of harvest, but practical harvesting has not taken place. So it's the obligation of zakah has not set in. It will set in when you actually harvest. But so the first opinion is the opinion of the majority of the scholars, those who say that once it is the first day of harvest, even though you have not in practice harvested, zakah has become due. Allahu a'lam, this seems to be the more correct opinion than the second opinion, which says it is whatever day you now decide to do the harvesting, even if the opportunity to harvest had come in before. And that is because both scholars agree that you are to pay zakah, that the actual payment of zakah will occur not on the day of harvesting per se, but after you have removed the grains from the chaff. You are not going to submit the chaff along with the grain when you are paying zakah. No, they all agree on this. And they also all agree that when you are measuring your wasp, is it 1 ausuk, is it 2 ausuk, is it up to 5 ausuk, to determine the nisab, the grain alone is what you will, measure. You are not going to measure grain and chaff together, plus the stalk and all that. No, you're going to remove the fruits if it is fruit-like. You're going to remove the grains if it is grain-like. And every other thing other than them is going to be separated. So you will measure only the grain or the fruits and determine the whether it reaches the nisab or not. And when, in the case of fruits, you put them in the storage place where it will allow them to dry, in the case of grapes, and turn into raisins. When it turns into raisins, then that is when you will do what? That is when you will pay the zakah. So this shows the this shows the what do you call it? The weakness of the second position. The first position says that once it is ready for harvest, that is when zakah becomes obligated, but it will not be actualized until when you now harvest, and after that you remove the chaff. After that, you store in the place that will make it, ready for being measured. Because, for instance, grapes, if you measure the grapes without drying them out to become raisins, then they will fill up the measure faster, because when you dry the grapes to become raisins, they will lose volume. So you need more of them to make 5 also. So all these processes will take place, and it's at the end, immediately at the end of that, when that you now do what? That you measure and pay zakah from that. Those who hold the second position, that is on the day of the harvest, they also say, yes, you are to remove the chaff. They also say you are to store, to convert the farm produce to the dry form that will be fit for storage, that will last, that will have a long shelf life, rather than the wet one, rutab. So therefore, since you are still going to do all this, it means in practice you are not paying zakah on the day of the harvest itself, except of course if all those processes can be concluded in one single day. And Allahu a'lam. So the Sheikh, rahimahullah, he says, إذا اشتدت الحب فصار قويا لا ينضغط إذا ضغط ووجبت الزكاة فيه. So when the characteristics, as we summed it up to be, of being ready for harvest is seen in the crop, then it is at that instance of time that zakah becomes obligatory, but not activated, like we said. وَإِذَا بَدَى صَلَاحُ الثِّمَارِ وَأَحْمَرَ أَوْ أَصْفَرَ في ثمر النخيل وفي ثمر النخيل. So if you're looking at tamar, for instance, which is the thamar of nakhil, the fruit of the date palm, then it is when it turns reddish or it turns yellowish. Initially it will be green in color, then depending on the species, it will turn to reddish, or it could turn to it could turn yellow. So whatever the the characteristics of ripeness is what we will go by, and the farmers will know that. So so as for now, wa-fi-l-Inab, and as for grapes, an yamuwahu halwan, is for it to become filled with liquid that is sweet, that makes it sweet, not bitter. I badala min an yakuna qasiyan, that is for the fruits, the grapes, rather than it being hard, it becomes yakun leanan, becomes soft, the opposite of the seed-like crops. And the fruit-like crops, initially they are hard, and by the time they ripen, they become soft. For the seed-like farm produce, initially they are soft. When they become ripe for harvest, they become hard. So in the case of inab, which is grapes, it is initially hard, then it becomes soft and sweet after, once it becomes ripe. وَبَدَلَ مِنْ أَنْ يَكُونَ حَامِضًا, rather than being bitter, يَكُونَ حَلْوًا, it becomes sweet. فَإِذَا اشْتَدَّتْ حَبْ وَبَدَ صَلَاحُ الثِّمَارِ وَجَبَ الزَّكَاة. So zakah becomes compulsory once it is ripe, once the farm produce is ripe for harvest. وقد ثبت تفسير بدو الصلاة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من حديث أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه نهى عن البيع الثمار حتى تزهي. قيل ما زهواها؟ قال تحمار وتصفار. Said the meaning of something being ripe for harvest, in the case of tamar, for instance, dates, was explained by the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, where the Prophet ﷺ, where he said the Prophet ﷺ, naha anil bay', is the Prophet ﷺ prohibited the selling of fruits until it becomes ripe. They asked, what will let us know that it has become ripe? He said, when it becomes reddish or it becomes yellowish. So this is the case in the case of dates. There could be other species with other colors. People, scientists, and all that, they develop different species and all that will have different colors and things like that. So what is important are the qualities that will show the farmer that it has become ripe, and the farmers will know that. Now, and also in another hadith, it said, Naha anil bay'il inab, that Prophet ﷺ prohibited the selling of grapes, hatta yaswad, until it becomes, blackish. Of course, we know that there are also other colors of, grapes. Wa anil bay'il hab hatta yashtad, and also he prohibited the selling of seed-like farm produce until it becomes firm and hard. Now, so in short, mata tajibu zakat fi al-hubub wa thimar, when is zakah compulsory to be paid on food, on seed-like farm produce and fruit-like farm produce? When does the obligation of paying zakah fall on the owner of that farm? It is when the fruits or the seed-like crops are ripe and ready to be harvested. Immediately that happens, the obligation sets in. But the effective, but when will the obligation be effected? It is when it is now, in the storage, ready, to be given out in zakah. Now, so let's keep this. It's okay. There's some benefit here. Now, I said the reason why the Sharia, the more correct opinion of the scholars on this is what we've said, that it is when, while still on the stalk or the tree, as the case may be, but the qualities of ripeness have shown that is when zakah sets in. He said, وَفَائِدَةُ ذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْمَالِكَ لَوْ تَصَرَّفَ فِي ثَمَرَةِ أَوْ حَبٍّ قَبْلَ وُجُوبٍ لَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ. He says, if the farmer, the one who zakat will be compulsory on, has tasarruf, he utilizes out of the farm produce before it ripens, then there's nothing upon him. He will not be regarded as someone who has, taken out of what zakat to be paid. Because what zakat to be paid on will be determined when the qualities of ripeness has appeared. Now, this is before that time. The crops have not become ripe at that time. So for whatever reason, he takes out of them and utilizes them for one thing or the other, then there will be there's nothing upon him. He has not violated anything of the Sharia. Once he did that, once he didn't do that in order to evade payment of zakah. Maybe he looks at the farm and says, from what I'm estimating, this thing will become, we'll reap 5 awsuq of dates. But if I take out this amount, it will be below 5 awsuq. And my taking out this amount will not hurt me financially. Rather, I will benefit from it because what will be left will probably be 4.9 awsuq. So there will be no zakat on it, and I can sell everything and I'll make money. So in this case, he's only deceiving himself. Zakat is still compulsory on him because innamal a'mal binniyat, actions are bought by intentions. It's the intention that one has that will be used to determine the actions that one took out, carried out. So this is this is it. So he said, La shay'ali, there's nothing upon him if he had no evil intention. لأنه تصرف قبل الوجوب. So knowing the time when it becomes compulsory, this is a benefit. Because if the farmer has tasarruf, utilizes the crops for whatever purpose before the obligation of zakah is established, before the obligation of zakah sets in, then there's nothing upon him. فَأَشْبَهَ مَا لَوْ أَكَلَ سَائِمًا أَوْ بَعَهَا قَبْلَ الْحَوْلِ. Says it's the same thing as if we were talking under Bahimat al-An'am, non-working free-range animals that are zakatable. That if before one lunar calendar clocks, their owner decides to slaughter out of them for food, or he decides to sell them, or gift them out or anything like that, not intending thereby to evade zakah, either to pay less than what he's supposed to pay. Maybe he sees on the day before the zakat man comes, he has 121 sheep. That means it has crossed to the next band. So he says, meaning he will now pay how many? 2 sheep. 40 to 120, 1 sheep. So he said, no, I don't have 2 sheep to give to the zakat institution. This one excess, I'll eat it myself so that I'll have 1 to pay. So 1 for them, 1 for me and my family. Now, in that case, he will still pay 2 zakah. He owes Allah 1. The zakat institution may not know what he has done. However, Allah knows. It's Al-Alim. So he owes Allah 1 more sheep. So it's the same thing here. But if he did that, even if it is the day before the zakat, whatever, to feed his family, perhaps this they kill a sheep on the 1st of every month, but zakat is due in his case on the 2nd of the month. So he kills as usual on the 1st of every month. Then there's nothing upon him. There's nothing upon him. So it's the same case here with crops. Now, ولا يستقر الوجوب حتى تسير الثمار في الجرين والزرع في البيدر. Says the activation of that compulsion to pay zakah, obligation to pay zakah, will only kick in when the fruits have been put into storage. The storage facilities for fruits, where they will become dry, therein is called jareen. and that for seed-like produce is called baydar. So they're just like silos where you put these things in, and it will preserve them, it will dry them up. ولو تلف قبل ذلك بغير إتلافه أو تفريط منه فيه فلا زكاة عليه. It says, if the produce becomes spoiled before the activation of payment of zakah, after the obligation of zakah, the obligation comes before the activation, as we explained. So the obligation sets in, but the activation has not set in. Between these 2 points, the produce now gets spoiled or stolen or whatever, such that it is no longer available to be given to the zakat institution. Once this happened due to no fault of the farmer, either and the fault could either be willful destruction or negligence. So once these two have not been established, then there's no zakah on him. If what is left afterwards, if anything is left, that is below the nisab. But if something is below, if something was spoiled or stolen and all that, but what is still left is up to the nisab, you would pay zakah on what is left. The excess, there's no zakah to be paid. The excess that was above the nisab, that was stolen or was lost due to no fault of his, there's no zakah on him. There's no zakah on him. But if then also, if there was nothing left, or what was left was below the nisab, then there's also no zakah to be paid. But in all these instances, if the loss was due to negligence on his part or willful destruction on his part, then there's still zakah to be paid. There's still zakah on him to be paid. سواء خرصت أو لم تخرص. The sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sunnah to mustahabba, at the level of mustahab, meaning if it is done, those who do it are rewarded, and if it is left undone, there's no punishment attached to it. It's khars. This sunnah is called khars, which is estimation. It is sunnah for the leader of the Muslims to send out the zakat collectors before the due date of collecting zakah, to assess the farms of those who are to pay zakah and estimate what they will end up paying in zakah, estimate what quantity will be harvested ultimately, and what out of that will be paid out of zakah. So this process is called khars, estimation. لأنها في حكم ما so he said سواء خرصت أو لم تخرص. So whether something is lost on the farm or not lost on the farm, what was estimated does not affect it. I.e., if the government or the zakat institution comes and estimates and says, okay, from what we see, this is what is likely to be harvested, and based on that, this is what is likely to be paid in zakah, they inform him of that and said, okay, no problem. But so after that, the obligation of zakah now sets in when the produce become ripe. But before he is able to pay the zakah, due to no fault of his, it becomes, some of it is lost or stolen, and therefore is, that which is lost, the portion that is lost or stolen, it will not be regarded, will not be counted as part of zakah. The zakat institution cannot come and now say, we have assessed the thing so before today and we told you, so you are going to pay. No. So whether it was estimated or not, it is what actually happened that is going to be, that they're going to go by. So was he negligent or not? Was it willful destruction or not? So if there was no fault of his, then there's nothing for him to pay in zakah with respect to the portion that was lost. Once what is left, if what is left is still the up to the sub or above, then he pays just that. If it is lesser than the nisab, then there's nothing upon him, even if what was estimated was far in excess of the nisab. It's the reality now that we go by. Now, لأنها في حكم ما لم تثبت اليد عليه, because it is what was lost is the same as what was not owned. And remember, milkiya or milk is ownership is one of the conditions for paying zakah. So what was lost or stolen is outside of the milk, the ownership, outside of the ownership of the one of the farmer. وإن تلفت بعد جعلها في جرين فحكمها حكم السائمة بعد الحول يضمنها. If so, another benefit of knowing the date or the time when zakah becomes compulsory, which we have said is when the qualities of ripeness have appeared even before it is harvested. One of the benefits is that if the loss, either due to theft or spoilage, or a fire breaks out or anything like that, happens after the crops have been put in their silos or storage facilities, then the case is different. Why is the case different? This case is different, and the ruling in this case is that whether he is negligent or not, according to some of the scholars, there are different opinions. According to some of the scholars, whether he is negligent or not, he is going to pay zakah on what is lost. If he is, if he does it willfully, then in addition to that, becomes sinful. If he does it due to negligence, then there's no sin, but he will pay zakah. So this is the position of some of the scholars. Why do they say this? They say that at the point where the harvests have now been put in their storage and they are fit to be paid in zakah, that at that time the farmer now becomes a trustee on behalf of the zakat institution. And being a trustee, that's the second position's point. When you put it in the storage facilities and it is due to be handed over to the zakat institution, that there's nothing stopping him at that point in time to give it to the zakat institution. So not giving it to the zakat institution in and of itself is proof of negligence. This is the position of the scholars who hold this opinion. لأنه استقر الوجوب في ذمته فصار دينا عليه. So they say because the obligation to pay, not only as it's set in, it has been activated and it has become a debt on him. The instance they are in the storage facilities and fit to be handed over to the zakat institution, they become debt on him. So on debt, you have to pay your debt. But Allahu A'lam, the more correct opinion is that there's no difference in spoilage, whether it happened before the activation of the obligation sets in, like we described a few minutes ago, or if it happened afterwards. What is important is did the person cause that loss willfully or not? Was it negligent or not? If it was negligent or it was willful damage, then if it was negligence or willful damage, then he will pay zakat on it. If not, then he will not. And this is the more correct opinion. And Allahu a'lam. And Allahu a'lam. Because the position of the scholars that say that what is important is whether it's negligent or he did it, caused the loss willfully, is that by the time you put it in the jareen and the storage facilities, the farmer in that case becomes a trustee for the zakat institution. He's holding it in trust for them. And someone who you employ to carry out a task for you, the default is that he is not liable until you can prove liability. For instance, you're ill and you go to a doctor. The default is that that doctor, whatever treatment he prescribes for you or surgery that he does, the default is that he is not liable for being prosecuted. However, if you can prove that he was negligent or caused willful loss or damage or harm to you, then he will be liable. But the default is that he is not liable. And that is a principle of usul al-fiqh. Al-amin la tudman. The one who is entrusted is by default not liable until you can prove liability. Because by you are a sane adult, and these are the things that are required to have taklif, to be morally obligated in the Sharia. So with your sanity and your being an adult, you choose this person to entrust either your life or your health or your property to. So that means you, by default, the Sharia believes that you have done your due diligence and found this person to be worthy of what you entrusted on him, that you entrusted to him. So therefore, there is by default no liability until you prove that, oh, he tricked me, or he hid something from me. He was a mechanic, but he posed as a doctor, and he went and he did perform surgery on me the way he would, work on a car, and this led to, harm and all that. Then you'll be able to prove, a willful damage or negligence, as the case may be, or both, in that case. Allahu a'lam. So it says, وَعَلَى هَذَا فَيَكُونَ لِلثَّمَرِ وَالزُّرُوعِ ثَلَاثَةُ أَحْوَالٍ. So based on what we have discussed, relative to obligation to pay zakah, the farm produce, the crops, will be in three stages, in three states. الحالة الأولى أن يتلف قبل وجوب الزكاة. If the products perish or get spoiled or stolen or damaged before zakah becomes obligatory, then there's no zakah to be paid based on what we explained. There's no zakah to be paid except if what is left is still up to the nisab or above it. So he said in this case, if the loss happened, whether willfully or out of negligence or anything, so long as it was not due to a desire to evade zakah. Once that is removed, any other reason, then there's nothing to be paid on him. فَهَذَا لَا شَيْءٍ عَلَى الْمَالِكِ مُطْلَقًا. There's nothing upon, no zakah upon the malik, the farmer who owns this produce. Now, al-halatu al-thaniya, if the loss happened and yatlifu ba'da al-wujub, if the loss happened after the zakat, the obligation to pay zakat has set in and has been established, but it has not yet been activated, implemented. In this case, in kana bi ta'addin min malik aw tafrid fa innahu yudman az-zakah. If the loss in this case was due to willful damage or negligence, then the owner, the malik, the farmer, will be obligated to pay the zakat still. He will be obligated to pay the zakat still, because the obligation to pay zakat already, set in, and now he willfully or out of negligence caused the loss. So it would be a case of somebody who was entrusted, but did not carry out the trust the way he should have carried it out. Then in this case, we approve negligence or willful, damage or deception or anything like that. لأن الزكاة استقرت في ذمته فصارت دينا عليه. So it is a dain. وقال العلامة ابن الإثين, Sheikh ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah is one of the scholars that hold the opinion, the second opinion, which is whether it is before the activation of the obligation to pay zakah or not. What is important is, was the person negligent or did he willfully, cause the loss? So this is what is important. We already said that before the obligation sets in, before the fruits become ripe, then he can do anything he wants with the farm produce. Once what he is doing is not in order to evade zakah. But after the obligation has set in, according to Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah and scholars who hold that opinion, and is the more correct opinion, Allahu A'lam, what is important is, was he negligent or not? Did he willfully damage or cause the loss or not? Did he willfully damage the crop or cause the loss or not? So Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah said, وَالصَّحِيحُ فِي حَالَةِ الثَّالِثَةِ أَنَّهَا لَا تَجِبُ الزَّكَاةُ عَلَيْهِ مَا لَمْ يَتَعَدَّى أَوْ يَفْرِطْ. Says what is more correct is that in this third example, that he is whether he willfully damaged the product or he was negligent. لأن المال عنده بعد وضعه في جرين أمانة, because he is a trustee, he is a wakil, he is somebody that has been given a trust, an amana. فإن تعدى أو فرط بأن أخر صرف الزكاة حتى سرق المال أو ما أشبه ذلك فهو ضامن. If he was negligent to the point where he delayed taking it to the zakat institution, perhaps he was procrastinating. I'll go tomorrow. I'll go next tomorrow. He was procrastinating like that until the crops were stolen or anything like that. Then in this case, he was negligent and he will pay the zakat. وَإِنْ لَمْ يَتَعَدَّى وَلَمْ يَفْرِطْ, if he did not willfully destroy the crop, or he was also not negligent, وَكَانَ مُجْتَهِدًا فِي أَنْ يُبَادِرْ بِتَخْلِصِهِ وَلَكِنَّهُ تلف مع كمال احتياط كمال التحفظ وحراسة فلا يضمن. If the product was lost, despite his best efforts to quickly discharge his obligation, however, despite all that, the product was either lost or stolen, despite his best effort and care, then there's nothing upon him to pay in zakat. There's nothing upon him to pay in zakat. Al-Khamisa, the fifth point the Sheikh Rahimahullah says we should look at with respect to zakah on farm produce. It says qadru zakah fi hubub wa thimar ala nahwi at-tali. It says what should be paid on zakah. What should be paid on zakah of farm produce is on the basis of what follows. We have taken that before, so we won't spend much time on it. And that is, if that thing is watered by natural means, then you have to pay 10%. If it was watered by efforts by the farmer, by doing an irrigation system, by drawing water from a well to water it, and things like this, then you pay 5%. 5% of what you harvest after removing the chaff and getting your nisab from what is left. Then you're to pay 5% of that in zakah. Now, what of instances where there's a mixture? And this is the third point here. The first point here talks about you paying 10%. Yajibul al-ashru fima sukiya bila mu'na. 10% is due as zakah on what was on crops that were produced without you spending in watering the farm. And in the second, it says yajibu nisf al-ushr, half of 10%, which is 5%, is due fima suqiya bi mu'na, on what was watered, on farmland that was watered, crops that were watered, bi mu'na, due to your spending. You spend to bring water to the farm. So 5%. The third instance is where there's a mixture between natural means and you spending on an artificial means of bringing water to the farm. It says وَيَجِبُ ثَلَاثَةُ أَرْبَعَ الْعُشْرِ فِيمَا يُشْرَبُ بِمُعْنَى نِصْفِ. Now, it says you have to pay 3/4 of 10%. You have to pay 3/4 of 10% on that which there's equal contribution between natural watering and your spending to water the crops. So if it's natural alone, 10%. If it is due to your spending to bring water to the farm alone, you pay 5% as zakah. If it is somewhere in between, equal, natural contributed to watering it, maybe for 6 months of the year, during winter there was rain and all that, then the farm suffice from the rain and the dew and all that. But the remaining 6 months was summer, and you had to rely on irrigation or any sprinklers or anything like that in order to provide water for the crops to grow. Then in this case you pay 3/4 of 10%. 3/4 of 10%. وَيَجِبُ ثَلَاثَةُ أَرْبَاعَ الْعُشْرِ فِيمَا يُشْرَبُ بِمَعُونَ نِصْفِ. So if your contribution for artificial irrigation or any other means like that was equal to half, then you pay 3/4. There's a fourth instance, and that is وَإِن جُهِلَ الْمِقْدَارِ غَلَّبَنَا إِجَابَ الْعُشْرِ. If you ask the farmer and he doesn't know which one, he knows that both natural and non-natural means contributed towards watering his farm. But he did not keep account, and hence he doesn't know which one carries more weight, which one contributed more. Was it the natural or the non-natural one? It says, the Sheikh Rahimahullah says, what we tend towards is that he will pay 10%. It says the opinion that seems wavy to us, that overpowers us, is that he will pay 10%. Why? لأنه الأصل, because this is the default. The default is that you pay 10%. Other than the default is when you now spend to bring water to your farm, to water your crops, where you will now pay 5%. But which is as what is the default? The default is that on farm produce you pay 10%. And that is why al-ushru is used as the basis in all the hadith. What the Prophet ﷺ will say is that وَمَنْ سُقِيَ بِالْغَيْنِ أَوْ كَانَ أَثَرِيًّا, or something like that, whatever is watered by water from the skies, or kana athariyan, or the crops via their roots are able to reach the water table, which is also a natural means. Al-ushur, you have to pay 10%. Wama suqiya bin nadh, and what is nurtured, watered by nadh, by sprinkling, by irrigation, or any other non-natural means like this. Nisfu al-ushru, half of 10%. So it's still relating it to the default, half of the default. So the Sheikh Ramila says that this is what is more wavy or wavier in his estimation. Allahu A'lam seems to be the more correct opinion. فَالْأَصْلُ وُجُوبَ الزَّكَاءِ الْعُشْرِ. So the aslu is to pay 10%. حَتَّى نَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ سُقِيَا بِمَا, until we get evidence that, non-natural means of getting water to the farm was what was employed. You spent in order to get that. Then there's a sixth. Parcel, the time has gone. Okay, we'll stop here. Next week we'll start from here. But let's just read the heading. Sadis and okay, now this is fifth. So this number 5 ends the topic on what you are to pay in zakah from your farm produce. Is it 10%? That will happen if you watered it, with from natural means alone. You didn't contribute money or any effort to bring water to the farm. If, however, it is the reverse, all the watering came from your effort, then 5%. If it is something in between, then it is between 10% and 5%, or half of 10%. So 1 of 10% and half of 10%. What is in the middle is 3/4 of 10%. So that is what you pay in zakah. Next week, we'll start with the 6th point that the Sheikh Rahimahullah wants us to look at under the zakah of farm produce. And what is that? It is al-khars. We talked about it briefly. That is estimation. The zakat institution is supposed to go out to the farms and estimate what is on the trees or what is on the farmland, if it is something like wheat and all that. So the fruits on the trees or the grains on the stalk of the farm produce, so that they'll get data, and data is useful. They have to know, okay, what do we produce every year, in this country, and things like that. But also what khars also does is that it frees up the farmland for the farmers, in the sense that the crops for the farmers, because after the estimation has been done, they can now, spend out of the products, even after it has become ripe, and the obligation of zakah has become due. Because an estimation has been done, and after estimation, the zakat collector who does the estimation will inform them that this is what we estimated and all that. So they know what the estimate is. So therefore, they can spend out of it, they can eat out of it, they can give their neighbors, they can do all that, because there's already an estimate at play. So it's not a situation where they can't touch it until, they measure it after harvesting. And therefore fear that if they take it before then, they will have done something wrong. So inshallah, we'll take that next week. Any question? Okay. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.